Well, perhaps the kernel or the seed for carrying the bill was what was sown by one of my coworkers. When I'm on the legislature, I work here at MSU Billings in the College of Professional Studies and Lifelong Learning. And last year, one of my coworkers, Kim Schweigert, who is a program director, she put together a conference in Billings on autism. And Kim was then, through the conference, introduced to the concerns of parents, particularly with regard to the lack of insurance coverage and treatment. And Kim approached me at one point and began to ask me about the legislative process for considering an insurance mandate. And then a couple of other things happened, coincidentally or non-coincidentally. Kim kept in contact with a group of parents who had attended the autism conference. And when they decided to move forward with legislation, Kim Schweigert, my coworker, came to me and said, "Is this something that you would be interested in doing?" And even though none of the parents that were involved in the initial grassroots effort were from the Heights, I felt, after thinking about it and talking with some other potential legislative sponsors, that because I had experience with an insurance mandate, that it would be appropriate for me to take the lead.
So you did.
So I did. So I decided to do that, and felt that because of, I guess my 12 years experience, not only I have a fairly solid understanding of the legislative process, but also insurance mandates and insurance law in Montana is fairly complex, and the bill only pertains to those insurance policies that are covered by, that are under the oversight of the state of Montana. And there's some subtleties about the way Montana regulates insurance and the interaction with federal insurance programs that I guess we felt that would be helpful. And I decided to do it. I mean, I had a pretty good working relationship with the insurance companies from my past legislative committee work, so I thought I would give it the old college try.
So, I mean, at that time, did you have any idea on the chances of something like this happening?
Well, to be frank, I thought this would just be the initial launching of the idea. I did not, I won't even say I was cautiously optimistic. I thought that we would have a tough go of it, particularly with the economy, and knowing that there's always a lot of rhetoric about insurance mandates and how costly they are. Of course, once we got into this and looked at some of the information, this particular insurance mandate would not be costly, but those things didn't really come about until we were well into the process. But I thought I would try. I thought I'd put my experience, having worked with insurance companies, to use in this case. And even though I don't have any close family members or friends that have children with autism, I was originally a psych major 4,000 years ago in college, and autism was certainly an area that I did some study at, and actually went to UCLA where they have a fair amount of research on autism. So, I mean, I haven't followed up with that, but I did have some past exposure to the challenges of autistic children.
So, nuts and bolts, what do you have to do to sort of start this process for the bill itself?
Well, to start the process, you need to, one, find a sponsor, which they had, and two, submit a bill draft request, and then you're assigned someone from Legislative Services to write the bill. So I was going to be the sponsor, and we had some content from a national organization, Autism Speaks, as to how the bill might be put together. And then we gave it to the legislative drafter, and they adapted and modified it to Montana law and also the formatting. There's actually a pre-set formatting for drafting a bill. We were very fortunate because we were assigned a woman, Sue O'Connell, who I consider one of the best bill drafters, and she began to work on the bill and identify, I won't say problems, but issues, concerns, potential controversial areas, not politically controversial, but just possible inconsistencies with other parts of Montana statutes. And so that was another critical step. So we finally got a bill drafted that was acceptable to all the parties that were pushing it, and then we introduced the bill and began to think about who would be co-sponsors, and we had, we tried to get some co-sponsors that we felt were considered bipartisan, that would be favorable. People wouldn't just feel it was a political ideology that we were trying to promote.
All right.
And then Laura and her team started to organize. In fact, they started to organize before the session as to how they would approach legislators to support the bill.
So, the bill's drafted, and do you officially submit it once the legislative session begins?
Right, once the session, it was drafted a little bit, we've completed a little bit after the session started, and then it was introduced, and then there's some timelines and requirements. You get sponsors, it has to be turned in, and then the next step is it is assigned to a committee for a hearing. So that all began to take shape, and I think the hearing was in, I can't remember, late January or early February, and it started on the Senate side, and then depending upon how far it would progress at each of these decision points would decide when or if it would go to the House.
So how was that decision made on which committee it would go to?
That is made by leadership. We weren't part of that decision initially. We're kind of disappointed that it didn't go to the Public Health and Human Services Committee. Instead, it went to the Business and Labor Committee. And we were, Senator Roy Brown serves on both, so we felt that he would be an advocate wherever it went. And then so that decision was made. Then we had the hearing, and Laura and the parents that she had organized had a great turnout for the hearing. And actually before the hearing, they'd started to alert or educate, I'd say, members of the committee as well as other people on the Senate side about the challenges when one has insurance and treatment of autism. A couple of things happened very fortuitously. Several House representatives from both sides of the aisle, Democrat, Republican, came into the Senate committee to testify in support of it. And these were supporters that we really hadn't anticipated. And that turned out to be very positive, because one of the legislators, Representative John Sanju from the Flathead, has a very close personal friend that has a child with autism, and they have Cadillac insurance that had been denied. And so he became spontaneously or extemporaneously a real advocate for the bill. And that was really encouraging, because it sort of showed other legislators that autism really touches people of all walks in life and of all political affiliations. And I think it was also sort of a signal that this really wasn't a partisan bill.
So the group of representatives, did they all have connections, family connections?
Family and friend connections. There was another woman, Representative Julie French, who works for a hospital, or had worked for a hospital in northeastern Montana, and she had worked with autistic children through her job. And I can't quite remember, a couple of other legislators came in that did have family members. So it was a surprising, but it was a real positive surprise. Normally at hearings, the surprises are normally bombs, but these were actually very favorable. And also, there was Laura Simonson had organized a good group of parents to come up and testify. So it was positive. I think one of the probably the most critical factors or critical issues was that the insurance companies at this point felt and testified that autism was covered by insurance. And without getting into the weeds, autism is considered a serious mental illness and is subject to some parity laws, but But the reality is that most of the services for autism that parents were submitting to their insurance companies were denied. And so, not that the insurance companies were not telling the truth, but there was a sort of a disconnect between a statute and how the policy was being implemented. And also there were all kinds of caps on that. So the testimony was 80% at that point about the challenges of autism and the importance of early intervention and the importance of having insurance cover it, and 20% more about the issue of whether or not insurance really was covering this or not.
So were you there for the whole committee?
Yes, I present the bill as the
Okay.
sponsor. So it was a fairly lengthy, I think it was almost a 2 or 3 hour hearing. And very intense at times, a lot of questioning, particularly when, one person's saying, oh, this is covered by insurance, and then other people are saying, no, it's not covered and I've been denied claims. So that was a good hearing. It did get out of that committee by one vote, which Senator Roy Brown from Billings here was instrumental. And not to be partisan, it had Senator Brown's vote. He's a Republican, and the rest were Democrats. So then the next hurdle is the bill went to the full Senate floor for discussion and deliberation. And it passed the Senate floor, once again, because there were a couple of legislators that had some family or friend connection with autism. However, another major hurdle was presented because the state of Montana is insurance plan. They have something like 15,000 subscribers, and they put together what's called a fiscal note, which indicated that if this mandate was passed, that the state would incur an additional $3 or $4 million in insurance premiums and costs for its subscribers and their dependents. And so, given the fact that it was a very austere financial situation for the legislature, the bill, because it had a fiscal note and a sizable price tag, then had to go down to another committee, Senate Finance and Claims, for approval.
Wow. So how is that report made, or who does it?
Well, the fiscal notes are developed by the governor's budget office, or the budget office. What happened then was it became sort of the war of the data. Of course, most of the insurance companies were pleased, thinking, well, if it's going to cost the state this much, what's going to cost us and our policyholders? Then that's where Autism Now sort of stepped in. They had an actuarial firm do an actuarial analysis to determine what would be the cost of this mandate in terms of its impact on premiums. And actually they ended up doing 3 or 4 versions of it specific to Montana, and that's where it sort of became the war of data, is because we had a fiscal note and the state of Montana's estimate that it was going to cost this much, and then we had this independent actuarial study. And what happened over, I think, the course of the whole legislative session is that discussion and debate was still in play. That's when we decided to put some sideboards, which is legislative lingo, for not so much restrictions, but clarifications on the insurance mandate. And we did that in a couple of ways. One is that we said that the maximum allowable would be $50,000, and that would be for children 0 to 8, knowing that most children don't get diagnosed until they're 3. And then from ages 9 to 18, a lesser amount, $20,000, would be the maximum allowable. So that was one sort of restriction. The other restriction was to, clarify that it had to be medically necessary, that the treatments that would be covered had to be part of a treatment plan, and that a physician would be sort of the keeper of the treatment plan. And these restrictions were something that I think all of the parents felt that they could live with, and actually looking at what other states have, were sort of in the same realm. And I guess in the reality is in my experience as a legislator, you're always better to really define or refine things in a statute rather than leave them open-ended, because while someone can say, oh, open-ended will allow more things to be covered, also open-ended will allow more things to be denied. And that was particularly the case. We did mention the issue of applied behavioral analysis, because there had always been sort of there's a concern or a rhetoric that that's experimental and what shouldn't be covered. Also, there was a concern by the insurers that it was educational as opposed to medically necessary. Although we already had it, I had known from my carrying of the insurance mandate for diabetes that patient diabetes education was included. So they call them red herrings, but we tried to really get as detailed as we could without going overboard. And in the process of doing that, the state did refine its original fiscal note and was able to reduce it down to under $1 million.
Wow.
That was good news. However, given the economy and the fact that this item had not been in the budget, and this would be a direct expense to the state, there was still some concern that it wouldn't pass out of Senate Finance and Claims. We had another good hearing, and then what's called executive action, where the members of the committee sort of debate the merits of this particular bill. And we, at that point, try to shift the emphasis, or not so much shift, but raise to the level of awareness that this was not a new government program. This was a remedy for people who were paying for insurance coverage. This was not part of other programs that dealt with autism. These were people who were writing out $1,000, $1,500 checks every month for premium coverages and then being denied services. So that was helpful, and it passed out of Senate Finance and Claims, and then actually went to the Senate floor again for another discussion. And at that time, the bill really, as they would say in legislative lingo, began to have legs. It really picked up steam and momentum, and I believe passed out of the Senate with a fairly, pretty wide margin, because people, were concerned about autism. They were concerned about people paying for insurance and not getting coverage, and also a greater awareness is that early intervention or treatment is really cost savings for the future when these children go into the school system, and rightly so deserve treatment. If they haven't had any treatment, then it can be more costly in the school system. The other thing is that at that time the state came forward with some information that a couple of young children, or children under the age of 18, for privacy purposes, we're not supposed to disclose this, had become foster or wards of the state because their parents couldn't afford the treatment. And the treatment for, I believe, one young person who had not received much treatment as a younger age, that it was going to cost the state upwards of $400,000 for 1 year. And I think that began to concern some legislators, that if we let this situation just, we don't address the situation, that there was going to be an enormous cost shifted to the state, which perhaps should be really cost shared by those who are paying for insurance.
So how are you feeling, through this whole process? How are you feeling about
Well, I want to commend Laura. She certainly did a great job of organizing the grassroots, and that was very important. There were people in the background sort of beating the drum all of the time, making legislators accountable for their vote, which sometimes doesn't happen. I think, not overlooked, but there are a couple other considerations is that we didn't have a paid lobbyist, but we did have a volunteer lobbyist, and Easter Seals put Charlie Briggs on the case, and that was really very important. He's a skilled lobbyist, and he and I worked well together. The staff in the minority office really did quite a bit of work getting us publicity, getting us media coverage, which would then reinforce Laura's team of grassroots efforts. To be frank, it was very time consuming because I had some other very heavy committee assignments, and we went head to head with the insurance lobbyists probably on a daily basis about both new issues that they'd bring up. Some were red herrings, some were issues that we had to, contact the insurance commissioner and make sure that we weren't, there were not going to be serious conflicts should the bill go all the way. So I think that there was a lot more confrontation in the Capitol on this than might have been told so far. I just really have to share that Charlie Briggs really did a great job, and I'm not underscoring the grassroots, but and there's a whole legislative dance that one has to do. I have had a reputation for being bipartisan. I would say you have to assess whether you want to get in the middle of other arguments, and that may sound strange or inappropriate, but there really is a legislative dance, just like there is in the workplace. You always have to know, what did our moms caution us, pick your battles. And that's very true in the legislature. You have to pick your battles. And I picked the autism battle, but that meant that for the time being, I wasn't going to weigh in on a couple of other battles. That there were always other people to champion that. So when we were able to pass the Senate,
now, wasn't there an amendment?
And that came in the House.
That came in the House, okay.
When we passed the Senate, like I said, we knew it had legs. We made a strategy decision. We knew that time was getting short. The House is divided 50-50. And we asked that the bill, since it already had both a policy hearing and a financial hearing, be referred directly to the House Appropriations. To be frank, we were concerned that it would get hung up in House Health and Human Services because it's a tied situation over there. So when we were deliberating in House Appropriations, an amendment was proposed to what's called sunset the bill in 2 years. So let it run for 2 years and then see what happens. And that, due to some misunderstanding, was put on the bill. And so this opened up and now I have to get into the weeds, a whole lot of other concerns, because if the bill was exactly the way it left the Senate, it would not have to go back to the Senate for a vote. But if it has an amendment on it, it has to go back to the Senate for a vote. And then if, let's say, for example, the Senate took off the sunset, then it'd have to go to a conference committee. And we felt that any more decision steps would really put the bill at risk. And that's where we go back to the very first hearing that we had way back in January, when some legislators from the House came in to testify about the bill. And that was Representative Sanju, who offered to offer the amendment on the floor to take the sunset off. And we knew Representative Sanju would be able to, what's called in legislative lingo, bring along some people to vote for him on the Republican side, assuming that we could get a fair amount of the Democrats. So anyone who's watching this, if they go, oh, everything always has to be partisan, well, that's just the reality of a two-party system. So we were optimistic, cautiously optimistic, that it was Representative Sanju leading the charge that we might be able to get off the amendment. Representative Kendall Van Dyke carried the bill in the House because, of course, I just can do my work in the Senate, and he did insurance mandate cramming 101 for the bill and did a great job. And we worked with Representative Sanju, and we worked with other people. You know, it's best, rather than to leave the debate up to circumstance, to have some people that will at least make 3 or 4 points that you think are critical. Because it's with any piece of legislation, the debates in Montana last minutes, not hours or days, like they do in, let's say, other states or in the nation. And so you really want to get some real basic facts out. And so we had a real good team of people who practiced or coordinated their efforts, and it was a bipartisan team. So the bill was successful. We got a pretty strong passage. I think almost 75% of the 100 members of the House voted for that. And so that was really exciting. We were elated. And then the next hurdle really was that it didn't have to go back to the Senate. We had to make clear that legislatively there was no other change to the bill. Even a comma almost might have made it have to go back to the Senate. And then it went down for the last hurdle, which is the governor's office. And the governor's office, not that the governor isn't very supportive of this, but because of the fiscal note, there was always a concern that they could either veto the whole thing or amend some part of the bill. And not that we thought that there would be, but that's always a concern. You learn in the legislative world that if something's going to go wrong, it will. But fortunately, the governor's office had no concerns with the bill. They did their final legal review, and then the governor signed the bill. He ended up signing the bill down here. If a bill goes down to the governor's office, and then within 10 days, if it's not vetoed or changed, it is passed into law. And that's what happened in this case.